Greetings everyone, this is Brian Alexander coming to you with yet another vlog about the future. To begin with, it is my birthday. I'm turning 58, which is very strange. I was thinking about recording a personal video, but instead today I'd like to address some of the possible medium and long-term implications of short-term political activity. And I'm doing this because obviously I'm in the United States and we are all thrown into a great deal of chaos and confusion by the new Trump administration's multiple acts of all kinds. And I've been thinking about how best to respond. I've done some blogging, I've done a little bit of vlogging, but right now there are so many analyses, there's so many summaries and curated lists of events and document aggregation that I wonder what I can actually add to this mix. My unusual skill set is that of a futurist, so what I'd like to do today is to look at the present, look at the past month of Trump administration activity, and to try to look into that for seeds of the future, what that evidence can tell us about things to come in the medium and long term. So I'd like to do that by working through some pre-existing trends in order to see what Trump is doing to them and what impact they might be. Now this is all very provisional, this is a first draft if you will, and so I would really love to hear your responses in comments or in your own video. So let's start off with one of the largest trends that we are all experiencing, which is the great demographic transition. Now broadly speaking, that means populations which are seeing fewer and fewer children produced and older people living longer and longer. And we know exactly how this happens. This is an outcome of modernity, where basically when the societies get a certain level of wealth, when they have improvements in medical care and in public health, and when especially women have access to the job market, to some measure of reproductive capacity, and especially to education, whenever that happens, almost inevitably a society will have fewer and fewer children and the adults will live longer and longer. And demographers refer to this as the demographic transition. There should be a less bland name, but that's the one we've got for right now. So what does this have to do with Trump? Well, right now it seems that Trump is continuing, at least verbally, some form of natalism. That is the idea that a society should produce more and more children. I haven't seen any real action on this score besides rhetoric. I haven't seen any support for, say, mandatory parental leave or extended tax breaks or cash prizes for parents of young children. Now, historically, if he did those things, it probably wouldn't have much impact. We have documented evidence of other nations trying this, such as Denmark and Singapore and Hungary, and they barely moved the needle on this score. And on top of that, let's just say hypothetically, imaginatively, if somehow Trump and his administration were to come up with a magic combination of factors that would convince American women to start having more children, in that case we wouldn't see the impact of this on the labor market for 16-20 years to come. So in the medium and long term, it seems likely to me that there isn't much change on that aspect of the demographic transition. Now, demographers and economists and almost anybody who looks at this subject usually says that the only solution a society has when it's suffering from the negative sides of the demographic transition, that is a shrinking labor force and increasing responsibilities for seniors, the only response to this really is immigration, because immigrants usually tend to be younger, they often reproduce in their first generation, and that is something that right now America has for a couple of generations really excelled in, but it seems unlikely to me that this Trump administration with its strong anti-immigration animus will actually encourage more immigration. So again, I think this seems to me that we will have little outcome from Trump in terms of demographic transition. We will continue to proceed along that route. A second major trend to think about, and this is one that gets a lot of talk from people in Trump and in the conservative area around Trump, has to do with globalization. I mean, we've all lived through the latest phase of ever-expanding globalization, that is populations, capital, commerce, information moving more and more freely across international boundaries. And it looks like Trump's America First theme is a blow against globalization. In fact, he and his supporters often call it globalists, which is a term with a whole bunch of baggage which we don't have time to get into. But it seems to me possible that that Trump's move towards what looks like a 19th or even 18th century style trade arrangement may really weaken globalization. That is, if he erects more tariffs, other countries may follow suit, and we may have something. The worst case would be the 1930s Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which led to rapidly rising trade barriers across the world, and which led to the Great Depression becoming global and even worse. I can see this playing out in a couple of different ways. If Trump continues in this kind of national anti-globalization drive, one possibility is that we will see the U.S. just step back from global markets to some degree, and this will hurt the American economy. This will lead to perhaps a recession, whereas other nations may then reorganize their supply chains, reorganize their markets. They're shifting populations into perhaps regional blocks, for example, led by China with its One Belt, One Road, or we may just see new arrangements for trade that occur at the global level just going around the United States. Now, alternatively, we could have that Smoot-Hawley nightmare, and we could see globalization really step back. I've heard from other people like Peter Zeihan that they think this is inevitable. I'm not quite so persuaded. I think that humanity has won so many benefits from globalization, especially in terms of standard of living, that it would be very hard to convince people to step back from that. To have consumers make do with less is not usually a winning proposition, especially in democratic societies. But it may be that we have passed peak globalization, and that right now what we're doing is trying to step back a bit, ratchet it down a little bit, and that Trump represents a major step in that. A third trend that I'd like to note is rising populism, and I'm fascinated by this in all kinds of reasons. Populism is, of course, a very, very old idea. This goes back centuries, if not millennia, in human history. I'm fascinated by in the United States that populism has now become entirely a right-wing phenomenon. That left-wing populism seems to have been just utterly destroyed, or at least put to one side. In other countries, there are left parties, but they also haven't done so well. They haven't got a lot of political traction, especially if you look at Europe. Now, one aspect of Trump's right-wing populism that seems to be very powerful is a rejection of experts, a rejection of authorities. And we've seen that particularly in an anti-left-wing move, a rejection of social engineering coming from progressive elites. I think we could see that continue to play out in a whole bunch of ways. We could see reduction of state power insofar as functions of state power were conducting social engineering on the progressive side. We could see a return to local folkways, to local religious belief, or at least a call for local religious belief. We might see anti-racist popular action. So I don't mean government officials taking action against immigration. We're already starting to see that, but local people doing this, as we saw last year in the United States and the state of Ohio, when there was the nonsense story put out that immigrants were eating pets in one town in Ohio, and we saw a lot of death threats and threats of violence against that community. So we could see more of that. So I think it seems likely to me that Trump is taking at least conservative populism and accelerating it. Now, in the field of climate change, I mean, this is in many ways the biggest trend that we can talk about. This is the mega trend that is, pressuring the Earth, one that we'll be working with for not just the rest of our lives, but for a century to come plus. And here, I think things are a little complicated. Trump famously or notoriously believes that climate change is a hoax. He refuses to address it, and his administration has been yanking all kinds of mention of climate science and climate action from all parts of the federal government as per Project 2025. And we may see as well increased carbon burning is called the drill baby drill, may be matched by, say, more private funding for fossil fuel extraction, perhaps more federal support for it in terms of drilling in Alaska and offshore and so on. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of momentum behind climate action. The clearest and simplest force of momentum for climate action is that wind and especially solar power are cheap. They're cheaper than oil and gas. And so you can see this if you drive through Texas, for example, where you can see, yes, classic oil derricks, but alongside lots of solar arrays because solar is just that less expensive. They're also built into the federal government to some degree. Biden administration guarantees for support for renewable energy. So what we might see is a kind of struggle play out inside the United States of pro and anti-climate action, or if you will, pro-fossil fuel and pro-renewable. And that could play out in multiple levels between different companies, nonprofits, local governments, the federal government. And I think globally, there's room for other nations and other players to take the lead. Right now, China may be the world's leader in pushing hard for renewable energy. After all, that nation has been taking the lead in producing low-cost solar. European nations have been struggling to continue with their solar action, but to some extent they still are. So we may just see, I think, an even bigger picture. I anticipate a kind of coalescence around climate action down the road. I think that'll occur because we have simply ratcheting up damages, so more heat waves, more storms, more sea level rise, and so on. But also, if you just look at polling, Generation Z is far more interested in climate than their elders. And as they age up through the workforce into positions of authority and power, I think eventually we will see a much greater commitment at a global level to climate action. So right now we might just be experiencing kind of short-term swerve away from that, a step down in the middle of a series of steps up. A couple of other trends to mention. I think I'll conclude with technology. Right now, we're living, of course, in a nation, in the United States, that has tremendous research and development technology. Until last month, we were the leader in AI, but we're continuing to work on all kinds of areas. And it seems likely to me that Trump and the Republican Party will continue to back technology R&D. They have historically, for the past generation. They've really been behind space. They really like AI. They really re-embraced Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley has definitely re-embraced them. It might be that we will just continue to see more and more federal interest in technological development. Now, I'm covering a lot of ground. I mean, technology, of course, includes everything from robotics to bioinformatics and so on and so on. But just, I think at the biggest possible picture, I think the U.S. will remain committed to that. But we might see, as a result, a kind of, I'm still not sure about this, we might see a kind of technology culture war. I may just do a video simply on this. That is, for a long time, there was the idea that Republicans and conservatives were very anti-science, and that largely settled on religious opposition to creationism. But we've seen instead that Republicans have really settled down on the pro-engineering side of things. They're very fond of technology. Meanwhile, Democrats seem to be shifting away from that. And for a long time, Democrats backed technology. They were big fans of Silicon Valley. We saw that, for example, under the Obama administration, under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But I think with 2016, there was a shock when Clinton lost, and lost badly, in her bid for the presidency. And I think that when the Democrats returned to power in 2020, they didn't re-embrace Silicon Valley that way. Instead, what we're seeing is a great deal of progressive opposition to AI, for a whole series of well-known reasons, and I can share some more of these later on if you'd like. Everything from AI being a replicator of bias, to being an aggregation of too much corporate power, to being bad for climate change, being bad for creative workers, being a source of labor exploitation in general, and so on. We're also seeing progressives that are against space exploration, seeing that either as a frivolous toy for away from the Earth. And keep in mind that human space exploration has almost showed that it was popular for about a year around Apollo 11. But other than that, it usually only gets a minority of support. So it may be that progressives really turn against space exploration. On top of that, there's an increasing call to label Silicon Valley as a right-wing hotbed. I mean, we saw that with the inauguration. We saw so many Silicon Valley elite there. We've seen so many players, Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Andreessen, backing Trump in a major way. I half suspect that this is actually are the result of a split within California between two great industries, between the South, Los Angeles, and the movie industry, movie, TV, and music industry around there, and the North, with Silicon Valley and the technology world. And I think the two of them have really drifted apart. I think for a lot of Democrats, they're trying to choose one or the other, and they've clearly chosen Hollywood, which is definitely, more telegenic and has all kinds of benefits. There's the sense that social media is bad for children, along with mobile devices, and also I think there's some inherited sense of progressive suspicion of healthcare technology as being inhumane. We see this with a progressive embrace of New Age beliefs, as well as of alternative medicine, alternative therapies. I think if we put all this together, we might be seeing, if not progressives, maybe the whole Democratic Party taking up a more and more anti-technological stance, in which case technology itself might become a kind of culture war football. I don't want to overstate this. Conservatives still can't, a lot of them can't stand evolution. A lot of progressives are happy to support all kinds of technology. As I've said elsewhere, I don't think the Democrats will go full Unabomber, but I think we might see this technology pro and against become a kind of theme in our culture wars. So I want to leave with that. I've hit on a few major trends reshaping civilization. I haven't talked about higher education, which is my normal focus. I've tried to bring in, to some extent, more of Trump. What do you think? Is this the kind of analysis that, well, first of all, do you agree? Do you think I'm right about these things? Please let me know in the chats or in the comments. But also, is this the kind of analysis that you find useful? Would you like me to dive more deeply into Trump right now? Or would you like me to spend more time on some of these trends? Let me know what you think. In the meantime, I hope everybody is well. As usual, I look forward to your thoughts and responses, and I will see you next time.